There is little left today of Edward's England. Cowdray House, where once he was sumptuously banqueted beneath vivid wall paintings showing his father's victories over the French, has long been a ruin. But one can still see the traces of its splendour and imagine the optimism with which Edward planned his and England's future. Edward was tremendously ambitious. If he had been able to do what he wanted to, then England would have been a truly different place. It would have been militarised, with a vast standing army and a network of efficient fortifications. He would have begun to centralise the economy, planning markets and investing in industry in a way that didn't happen in Europe for at least another century. He would have created an England of extreme religion, a puritanical religion that would have been rigorously enforced and policed. In short, he would have created a modern Protestant state, more akin to what happened in Prussia or Sweden than anything we now associate with England. But none of this was to be. Edward returned to London from the Progress, fit and well. But in February, he started to cough, and by March, he looked very weak and thin. By April, he was vomiting blood and black and greenish matter. He had what doctors would now diagnose as a suppurating pulmonary infection. Then they called it a consumption, and they could do nothing about it. The fate of Protestant England was slipping out of Edward's grasp. Edward knew that he was dangerously ill, perhaps even that he was dying. So his thoughts naturally turned to the succession. By law, that is, by his father's will, sanctioned by Act of Parliament, his successors were, first, his half-sister Mary, and second, his other half-sister, Elizabeth. But Mary was Catholic. If she were to succeed, it would undo everything, the whole Protestant achievement of Edward's reign. So Mary had to go. Elizabeth, on the other hand, was Protestant. But equally, she was resolutely committed to the principles of legitimacy and legality. She would never agree simply to be substituted for Mary. This meant that Elizabeth had to go as well. So who was Edward's heir? The young king's own answer to this question is contained in this document here. It's got the rather Adrian Mole-like title of My Device for the Succession, and it's written in the unformed hand of a 15-year-old boy. But the mind behind it is entirely adult and mature. If Edward's half-sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, were to be excluded from the succession, then the obvious heirs were the descendants of his Aunt Mary. But these were all women, her daughter Frances and her eldest granddaughter, Jane Grey. But Edward, as a good Protestant, disapproved of women rulers. So he doesn't leave the crown to Francis and Jane. Instead, he leaves it to their sons, their heirs male. But the production of sons takes time, at least 9 months. And at some point, after the drafting of this document, Edward discovers that he doesn't have time. He's dying. So, very quickly, and with the minimum change, he alters his device. The Lady Jane's heirs males becomes, by removing an S and adding and her over a caret, it becomes the Lady Jane and her heirs male. With 3 strokes of the pen, the dying boy had made Jane Grey heir of England. In the last days of his life, Edward himself bullied and cajoled members of the Privy Council into endorsing his will. He died on July the 6th, 1553, in the faith in which he had been educated. His last words were a prayer in English of his own devising. Edward's death was kept secret even from his sisters. There were no last farewells, for nothing must get in the way of his scheme to save Protestant England. But it was all to be in vain. Despite the dying Edward's heroic efforts of will, his scheme for the succession failed. For Edward, preserving Protestantism was all that mattered, but the English decided differently. They wanted a real Tudor as the next monarch, and for that they were prepared for anything, even for Edward's worst nightmare, a return to Catholic England. Next week, the story of Edward's sister, Mary. Driven by her own burning faith, she condemned hundreds of Protestants to burn at the stake. Queen of a divided country, her own life was one of love and loss, trust and betrayal.